Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Poems story. In these videos, I tell you the stories behind the poems in my first collection, Between Hindsight and Foresight. At least part of the reason why I started telling these stories is because as an English teacher, I frequently have to answer the question from my students, why are we doing this? Why are we studying poems? What if the writer didn't actually mean anything by that? What if the sky is just blue, not because they're happy? So I wanted to kind of explain and give you a bit more detail on where these poems come from for me. Now, obviously, some of the poems are a little bit more deep, a little bit more meaningful or personal for me than others. Some were just written for the challenge, some were just written for the fun of it. However, some of them are a mix of both. Some of them are a challenge, an attempt to express something, but they somehow don't quite meet even my own expectations. That's the case with the poem for tonight. Tonight's poem is called Without. And Without was me attempting to meet a challenge I had set myself. I've previously spoken about the other Villanelles in my collection. Freedom's Judgment, which was about anger and frustration at being judged by a society. Losing My Senses, which was about the physical passion, the five senses coming into play, and Worshipping Leith, which was a kind of unintentional villanelle because I started writing it and then it started to fit the form and I just went with it, which was about memory and memorializing someone who has passed, but also remembering that as long as we keep memory alive, it doesn't die. Without is also using the form of the villanelle, and Without was written at the same time as Losing My Senses and Freedom's Judgment. It was written during university. It was written after I was taught how to use the form, how to write the form, and I was challenging myself to see just how many of them I could come up with. Unfortunately, it is my least favorite villanelle. And it's about the whole kind of loss of love. I think perhaps part of the reason why it feels lacking to me is that it's not about a person. I don't believe I was in a relationship when I wrote it. I don't believe I had recently lost a relationship when I wrote it. And so because the emotion I was trying to capture wasn't immediate and raw and right there for me to access, it was a lot harder to capture, to remember when I'd felt it before and try to capture it in hindsight. So I think that it's entirely possible that it doesn't quite fit, it doesn't quite speak to the emotion I was trying to get about anyone who is, loved and lost, because, it didn't quite get that feeling when you don't know what you did wrong, but you've lost your relationship anyway, or when you feel like you didn't do anything wrong and they still left. That feeling of the loss of it, that feeling that can make you feel completely empty. Not that you feel you individually yourself are less, but that you just feel there's kind of an unexpected lack, that you are suddenly without something that you feel like you should have. I'm not sure if that's why it doesn't feel right. I'm not sure if that's why it doesn't quite match up to what I was thinking and what I was feeling at the time. But I do know I was aiming to try and capture those feelings with the villanelle because the couplet and the repetition of lines seem to be suited to that going over and over and over it in your mind. When you have that kind of loss, when you have broken up from a relationship and you don't know what you did wrong, you don't feel like you did anything wrong, and there's that emptiness, you do go over every little detail. You do repeat yourself. I don't know why you're gone. I don't know why there's not somebody there. I don't know how I'm going to carry on without understanding that, without you there. And so there is a certain attempt to use what the form was intended to be used for to express something that didn't quite work. Now, I do still like the poem. Obviously, I included it in the collection because villanelles are difficult to write. This one was not poorly written. It works. It does what it's supposed to do in terms of the form, but it is my least favorite of the four. I liked it enough to include it in the book, but I never really felt like it quite got there. So hopefully, I won't have to write another one. I don't particularly want to experience a breakup in order to improve my poetry. However, I do think that it's important to include work that we think is well done, even if we're not 100% satisfied with it. Most writers know about imposter syndrome. Most people who write poetry or fiction or even nonfiction know about the concept of wanting to get it perfect, wanting to get it just right. It doesn't always go there. And of course, what I think is not quite right might be exactly what someone else wants to hear, somebody else wants to see. And so even though we aren't always entirely satisfied with our work, it might be important to someone else to read it. So hopefully it will, including something that is basically well written, but not quite what we want it to be, might be helpful to someone else who is struggling to get even that far, to try and capture those emotions. And if they look at what we've written, which is almost there for us and is exactly there for them, might encourage them to try writing themselves and to get a little bit closer than we did. So that is the story behind the villanelle in my book called Without, which part of what I'm starting to think of as my breakup poems. I hope that you've enjoyed my ramblings as usual, and I hope to see you again next week for another story of Behind the Poem.